Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Carrie Burke, your moderator for today's webinar, Continuous Authority to Operate with ThreadFix, bringing commercial insights to the DoD. You may send in questions at any time during the presentation via the chat feature. We will collect these and address them at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce your speakers, John Dickson and Dan Cornell. John is a security professional and industry leader who regularly works with the largest companies to deliver secure software in the DevSecOps pipelines. John is a former Air Force intelligence officer who became a cyber officer in the Air Force Information Warfare Center. Dan is a globally recognized application security expert who holds over 15 years of experience architecting, developing, and securing web-based software systems. As Chief Technology Officer and Principal at DENIM Group, he leads the technology team to help Fortune 500 companies and government organizations integrate security throughout the development process.
All right, thank you, Carrie. We'll get going here. This is John Dickson. I give you a quick insight into what we're going to cover. We'll provide the background on the commercial experiences that we've had and some of the insights we have shared with others. We'll share today. Then we'll talk about ThreadFix as part of a CI/CD workflow, and then a walkthrough, just a screenshot of the product, so you have the context itself. So as Carrie had mentioned, I'm an ex-Air Force intelligence officer who became a cyber person in the mid-90s. I was one of the original AFCERT analysts and have stayed pretty close to many of the folks that still work the mission. I'm in San Antonio, so I know many of the people both at the 16th Air Force and now at NSA Texas. But the bulk of my experience has been in the commercial realm since. And so that's what I hope to share with you today, Dan and I, the things that we're seeing on the outside that are affecting the way security and software is being built. And then I do a tremendous amount of speaking, and we'll be out at RSA next month, and so we'll look forward to that. My colleague Dan Cornell comes from a very strong software background, has been in the software and application security space for now 20 years. Very active in what's called the Open Web Application Security Project, is an international leader in that space. And with myself, he and I are out on the conference circuit and speaking. Dan will be talking about really kind of the hows and wherefores of ThreadFix in the context of the DoD and intelligence community space. So we'll go from there. All right, for those that don't know DENIM Group, we're based, as I mentioned, in San Antonio with a big presence in Austin. We are in the application security space that is called many different things, software assurance, software security, application security, but that's our space. And we have also evolved into the DevSecOps world, the DevOps world in pipelines. So we do a tremendous amount of security testing around web, mobile, IoT, and now cloud testing. So if you have questions about software vulnerabilities and resilience, we are now one of the top firms in the U.S. in this space. So let's just jump right into it. Some of the commercial trends that we are seeing are probably stuff that seems almost a statement of the obvious, but I think it's this insatiable request by the businesses for features and functionality. It's also to the point of ridiculousness where they think about a function or feature that needs to be transformed into an app like the next day. And I think some of the DevOps brand promise have kind of helped accelerate that and feed that desire. But you really see companies in the commercial world that view time to market as really the driving factor. You hear it that Netflix worries about Amazon Prime. They don't worry about everything else. So they're willing to put functionality and features out and at the expense of other things. So I think that's that competitive landscape, that tempo and cadence around having first to market, being able to address niches is really driving a lot of behaviors in organizations in the commercial world. They rely heavily on behavior analytics This is, their customers' analytics. So that's kind of interesting. So that's where you get in the big data world, and then also into you pick up some of the AI and machine learning buzzwords that are out there, and some of those new approaches are really in being able to predict what users want and what they really want to buy. Now, at the same time, the internal customers, the actual business units, the operators, so to speak, are the ones that have gotten much more sophisticated about demanding quality capabilities quickly. They understand the IT realm a lot better. They certainly, in many instances, understand security, but they are driving some of those discussions even before this whole DevOps ethos about getting dev and ops closer. That was already happening organizationally, where you have IT people being embedded into quote unquote the business unit. And so you start to see this in this kind of cross-pollination. And one of the things I like to use is regionally, we have a very large regional grocery store chain in San Antonio, and they have essentially put everything together to do delivery of groceries at the curbside delivery. Well, that was a function of business operations and IT folks in the form of apps, in form of inventory. Like essentially all these things got merged together. That was happening already, and it's embodied in DevOps pipelines. Also, the other interesting thing, at the same time, you see centralized IT becoming more fragmented, and what I used to call the imperial CIO, the very centralized IT leader, now is facing that the opposite side of what happened in the last 20 years, which is the devolving of IT capacity out to the business units are being embedded. So you have less centralized control, maybe even less centralized approvals, if that makes sense, including security. I've included a link here to a white paper on the topic. This sometimes gets mentioned in the realm of digital transformation. You'll hear that term in the commercial side. It's just a fancy word for the movement towards really rapid capabilities and capacities and customer expectations. So we're seeing a lot of this in the commercial world, both in the financial services across the board, entertainment and others. And again, what we see on the other side is the tech component of that. And what that is we see the tech stack changing. The world used to be very much a web application world where web applications were built in kind of compiled languages like .NET and Java, and maybe they landed in a data center that lived on premise. That world is gone. And so what you're seeing now is you're seeing a rapid adoption of microservices, which just flat out have to be built in pipelines, the nature of how they're built and how they're updated. So, and at the same time, you have these products increasingly delivered through pipelines, and I use the term pipelines plural, because even within the same organizations, you start to see the many different adaptations of the concepts. And so, like, the funny story is on our side, if we hear DevOps pipelines, CI/CD pipelines, are usually our first question is, define what that is and how you interpret that within the context of your organization. And then the other thing, everything is obviously landing in the cloud. So that is the challenge that we're seeing is in addition to organizational changes, process changes, the underlying tech stack has just completely changed at the same time. So keep that in mind as you are going to interpret the security guidance that you get. So the impact from a business standpoint, again, is rollout is measured in days or maybe hours, not months. We kind of reminisce about the days of waterfall development when products could be developed in a formalized way over months. That's gone. I mean, if it's not gone, it's going. And certainly the more sophisticated organizations are already there. What you see then is connected systems throughout the organization, a heavy adoption of web services, of APIs, consumption of APIs, which brings up a whole question of trust and who does what. But it's happening all over the place. And as you can imagine the effect that like an Amazon is having on retail across the board. Everyone wants to be able to iterate quickly. They don't want to be the Blockbuster to Netflix, for example, and wake up one day and their whole business model is obsolete. So that's the fear. The fear of competition kind of drives behaviors on the outside. Obviously, the dynamics of mission changes, certainly in battlefield environments, are equally, if not far more dynamic. And so some of the same concepts can directly be applied on and are being applied too. So then the last thing is, and this depends on the culture of the organization, depends on the organization itself, but security might be a consideration, but candidly, time to market considerations are paramount because you're really getting so many iterations out there that you rather address a market need and have some risk there than miss the entire market need, if that makes sense. So here's some things directly that DoD and by kind of extension, maybe the IC and I would say folks operating in trusted environments. And these are the types of things you can learn. First of all, that security must be mindfully baked into the DevOps pipelines themselves. And again, plural pipelines, not pipeline. And then that has to be really driven off the context of the tech stack, the application development environment, maybe, the actual framework and language, and then the mission function. All those things. So I think much of that is captured in some of the DoD guidance is coming out, and just the sheer recognition that one size does not fit all. But as I mentioned, also there is we understand a strong move towards microservices, and that will make it a necessary switch even if you don't like it. And so just the fact that one monolithic application now might be 250 microservices means that you cannot apply a waterfall, kind of structured waterfall approach even if you wanted to. So the other thing is in these environments is you have to have a way to certify the build. I'm not an accreditation authority or not but I understand that obviously you have to accredit software for it to be operated in trusted environments. And you can't have an entire pipeline and then have an out-of-band manual process to do that. That is essentially one trend. And then finally, if in fact there is a security problem or you break the build, you have to have a workflow to push that particular vulnerability to be fixed ASAP. So again, if you're going to automate everything, if you're going to automate quality testing, regression testing, the actual deployment of software, you have to have alternative workflows to do the same thing in the security stuff. And we'll talk about that in the context of some of the problems we're helping solve. So just a quick intro on our ThreadFix platform and how it's used in the commercial world, just as a starting point for the more technical discussion. What ThreadFix does is it takes the many disparate inputs from multiple testing platforms and tools in the application world and soon to be the network world, and it ingests those into a common environment or a pane of glass that allows you to consolidate, aggregate, and analyze primarily software applications and a little bit of network context, and to be able to report and prioritize those. So if you have a centralized person that is managing risk of software or certification or acting as an approval authority, these many different tools go into this one platform to then be analyzed, pushed out, or in the case of vulnerable software, to be injected in the workflows that developers would use. So how is ThreadFix used today? It's enabled, in the DoD world, it's primarily to automate the deployment and approval, the accreditation within a risk management framework, and it does help save time, effectively cutting the time to do that. But it's primarily used within DoD and IC environments as part of a DevOps pipeline. On the commercial side, you'll see many of the larger organizations use the merge function to validate the fidelity of some of their scanning activities, What we see in the DoD side is more on a use of ThreadFix and this entire automation to accelerate approvals. So in a nutshell, what we are doing right now is taking existing pipelines or existing software development components and making them go quickly. So we're using ThreadFix as a security platform that allows different software factories to get faster accreditation. That's it in a nutshell. It automates the back-end process of collection, aggregation, and pushes the results to decision makers in an automated framework. So the key takeaways are that the ThreadFix platform allows Air Force operators and by extension DoD operators to manage the accreditation and approval process in a much quicker way. It allows you to ingest and do analysis of these very disparate inputs, primarily software inputs, and then it allows you to integrate and accelerate that entire process so that you can approve software changes and updates and get them to the operators more quickly. And with that, I will hand off the discussion about the hows and wherefores to my colleague and CTO of DENIM Group, Dan Cornell.
Thanks, John. Thanks to everybody for taking time tuning in today. So now I'll talk through a little bit of what we've seen of how ThreadFix gets applied, again, in commercial environments and how that translates into a variety of different federal environments. And a big area of strength or of value that we see for organizations using ThreadFix is in a lot of the orchestration capabilities. If you look at both in commercial and in federal spaces, there are some real challenges around how data gets managed and how data gets communicated. And in a lot of cases, those get in the way of the ultimate goals of these organizations and add friction. And so with ThreadFix, we're trying to reduce that friction where possible. And a big part of this is in decreasing the friction between the development teams and the tools they're using and the security teams and the tools that they're using. And so that's been a key focus for us with the ThreadFix platform is how do we reduce that friction to provide that better integration? And if you want to look at this through the perspective of an OODA loop, how do we tighten that OODA loop? Whatever that might be. But with ThreadFix, again, we integrate with the different CI/CD pipeline orchestrators, allow those to work with ThreadFix to orchestrate and consolidate the results of different security testing, and then provide feedback to the development teams, both in their CI/CD platform, potentially passing or failing builds, or providing warning based on policies, and also in communicating with the dev teams and the tools that they're already using, their defect trackers that they're using, Jira, or so on and so forth. And so with ThreadFix, a big area of focus for us and a big area where organizations get a lot of value is in using ThreadFix to handle that orchestration, the data management, and the data communication. I just want to provide some links here. Again, we work with a number of organizations on the broader problem of accreditation, and whether that is, dealing with how to get a certificate to field, a CTF, authority to operate, ATO. I just want to provide some links to some publicly available documents from the FedRAMP folks to use as a background. Again, these will likely need to be adapted to the specifics of your organization, but wanted to provide access to some publicly available resources. And there's some real challenges we've seen with the accreditation process in the federal space. And as John mentioned, we do a lot of work both in, with government entities and across the broad spectrum of missions in the government, as well as across broad industries in the commercial world. And even, with us doing a lot of work in heavy regulated industries, financial, banking, and things of that nature, even in organizations or industries like that are extremely happy about paperwork and the process. I would say that the federal government still maintains a comfortable lead versus those commercial industries in a lot of ways. And that's a challenge, and again, recognizing that the mission in the federal space is a lot different. I hate losing money. Businesses hate losing money, but in the federal space, we're also dealing with potential loss of life and other even more serious impacts. But the challenge with a lot of the traditional approaches, they're slow. They rely on a lot of manual manipulation of data, as well as creation of documents. And so the big areas where we've been able to help folks in the federal space is to identify how can we tighten this process up and use automation wherever possible to make those loops of going from I have a new build to I've gone through the accreditation process. Where are the opportunities to do that? And from what we've done to do that is essentially let's identify the aspects of the accreditation process that have less drift and use technology to accelerate those parts that move more quickly. Looking here just at the documentation, the checklist for a sample accreditation process, the ATO process from those FedRAMP documents, parts of these move quickly, and that's where you really want to focus on the automation. Other parts of these move much more slowly, and that's where automation is less critical or less valuable. And so if you think about these systems, your overall system architecture, hopefully that's not changing. Even if you're using an agile development cycle, hopefully each new requirement that you are finding doesn't cause the system architecture to change. Other aspects of systems move more quickly than that, but not terribly so. Overall testing plans, testing guidance, and things of that nature. That said, there are aspects of the system verification that typically need to be largely rerun for each new version where you need to go through that accreditation process. You're going to have different results from these testing activities. The infrastructure you're using needs to be tested, your database testing, your application testing, your manual testing. Those are the areas where things move quickly and where you want to drive as much automation as possible to make that loop a lot tighter. And so with ThreadFix, the areas of value, there are a couple areas of value. Again, largely dealing with the data management and the data communication aspects of this, and opening up, either taking advantage of current automation that's in place, and in a lot of cases, opening up new avenues for automation to say, let's automate absolutely everything that it makes sense to automate so that we're taking that slack out of these cycles. A big aspect of ThreadFix is it allows you to create a centralized view of the results of these different types of testing that go into the accreditation process. And that spans networking infrastructure, the application and software assets, moving now toward containers and cloud and other assets, and being flexible in the way that we let you get that data into the system so that you have one single location where all of this testing, the results of all this testing can be found so that you can slice and dice and manipulate those results as needed. I already talked a little bit about where folks find value from the orchestration and automation, and this is, these days, a lot of organizations moving as much as possible into CI/CD pipelines, but also the automation that goes around more legacy processes. A big point of ours with ThreadFix is we expose a really extensive REST API, have a command line client, and again, as I've mentioned, that allows you to take advantage of any automation that you may already have in place, as well as open up new avenues for automation. Again, these days largely in CI/CD pipelines, but we also see automation outside of those. When we come to data management, looking at how do we normalize, deduplicate, and make sense of the results coming out of these different classes of tools. That's actually an area where we did a bunch of research funded by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security in the software assurance and software security space. Now, as I said, also extended to the networking infrastructure world and moving on to containers and cloud assets. And ultimately, once you've brought this data in, made sense, made your policy decisions, the reporting, whatever standards you might be using, if this is STIGs, if you need to report an OWASP top 10, how do I get the data out of the system? How do I generate these documents that we need to work our way through the accreditation process? Now, just to provide a quick walkthrough, again, we don't really have time today to get too deep into this, but if this is an area where you have some interest, certainly please reach out. We're always happy to go, and I'm certainly happy to go into a deep dive on the technology, but reach out to us, and we're more than happy to go through and and look at these things in more detail. But just to walk through the ThreadFix platform and the aspects where federal organizations see a lot of value. The first is in the asset management, especially around software. If you're building these software factories in your organization, managing those assets, talked about the result consolidation. How do I bring in the results of different testing, coordinate those, and make sense of that? Look at the CI/CD build and post-build process and how we take advantage of the capabilities that are there, as well as open up new avenues for automation, and then reporting and metrics. So with ThreadFix, it lets you lay out the assets that you're dealing with, both from a software standpoint as well as from a network infrastructure standpoint, moving toward containers. So what are all the building blocks that you have that are moving through your software factory? Let's capture those assets. Let's capture the metadata about those assets so that we understand the policies that should be applied. We understand how to use those in the context of a risk management framework. Let's track those all in one place and provide the correlation so that we know how the pieces of these increasingly complicated systems all fit together. And that's really something that is critical to, if you look at the construction of your software factory, what are the widgets and the pieces that are coming out at the other end that are being composed into these ultimate running systems? It's really a kind of a fundamental issue that has to be addressed if you want to make this process go faster. Then we look at creating a consolidated comprehensive view. So ThreadFix pulls in the results of the major classes of testing tools, from the network and infrastructure side, your Nessus, your Rapid7, your Qualys. On the application and software asset side, your static application security testing, like your Fortify and your check marks, your dynamic application security testing from WebInspect, from AppScan, your IAST from players like Contrast that are increasingly being used in these CI/CD pipelines for DevSecOps, as well as your software composition analysis. If you're looking at how do I craft my software bill of materials and how to identify the risks with those, ThreadFix pulls in the results of your Black Duck, your Sonatype, your dependency check, and allows you to have all of those in one place, along with the results of the manual penetration testing or code review activities that might be going on depending on the process that you're going through. And in this database that we craft and maintain of these results, we allow you to track, where have you identified false positives, keeping that historical knowledge so that doesn't have to be reapplied each time there's a new test that's being run. Keeping track of analysts' thinking. If something was marked as a false positive or if something's risk ranking was changed, what was the thinking of the analyst, maintaining that audit trail? But basically allowing you to keep to construct and build and maintain over time this consolidated and comprehensive view of all the vulnerabilities identified in the system, as well as the resolution of those. A big part, again, is this CI/CD integration. And one of the things that we've learned in building the ThreadFix platform over the past 10 years is every organization runs their testing program, their accreditation program in at least a slightly different way. And then within large organizations that have broad missions, different groups are probably going to be running testing in different ways. And so with ThreadFix, a big priority for us is to be extremely flexible in the way that we allow you to take advantage of the testing that you already have in place, as well as open up new avenues for testing. And so within the CI/CD build pipeline integration, ThreadFix allows you to execute scans with certain scanners, where the technology makes that a straightforward or possible thing to do. So, for example, kicking off check marks and static scans. ThreadFix also allows you to orchestrate certain dynamic scanners via ThreadFix's scan agents. And so during the build process, allowing you to orchestrate scans with certain subsets of scanners. Also looking from a post-build process, If you have other orchestration in your pipeline that is being used, if you're orchestrating other tools, you have existing automation that's in place, ThreadFix also allows you to take advantage of that and basically scoop up the results of other testing that you've done, submit that to ThreadFix for its combined analysis. And you can optionally add policies to make an evaluation to say, we're potentially going to pass or fail a build based on the consolidated results of this testing. And so we provide a lot of flexibility for groups that are, have different goals or at different stages of maturity and different stages of the life cycle. But we try to provide a lot of options for organizations to start speeding up the process with what they've done right now, but also to, from a roadmap standpoint, set goals for, here are incremental tasks or additional testing that we want to get under the umbrella here so that those parts of the process can cycle more quickly as well. I talked again, giving the option to manage policies and criteria, for the particulars of your organization, the software that you're looking to field, understanding what are the requirements for a build to be considered good, what are the requirements for you to move forward in the accreditation process. And then the metrics and reporting of having that all in one centralized location, doing your reporting based on whatever standards that you need. We've got built-in use of CWE, CVE from MITRE for standardization, built-in reporting for the STIGs, for other standards or other systems like the OWASP Top 10, and also as I mentioned, ThreadFix exposes a really extensive set of APIs so that for other documentation requirements that you have, you can basically automate how you want to pull the appropriate data from ThreadFix, put it into the appropriate format so that that can be passed on down the line. Again, what we're looking at here is that whole process from the asset management through the testing and the data management as well as the data communication, a lot of automation, and then on the tail end of this, being able to report and generate the documentation that you need to meet the needs of your accreditation process. Excellent. So at this point, now let's bring John back in here, and if folks have questions, please submit those via the chat function. Happy to answer a couple questions for y'all.
Okay, here's one from Pascagoula, Mississippi. Howdy to everybody in Mississippi. What CI/CD tool does ThreadFix integrate with today?
So we've got a built-in integration with the Jenkins, and also the way that the ThreadFix APIs are constructed, the way that the system is architected, the vast majority of the logic for the orchestration and all the heavy lifting is done in the ThreadFix platform on the server side. And so while we have a built-in plugin that you can upload and use in Jenkins, it's also what we've seen with organizations using like Azure DevOps. They just use PowerShell to make calls at the appropriate times in the pipeline to say, orchestrate this scan, grab the results of this and upload it and whatnot. And so we've seen integrations with Bamboo, with Azure DevOps, and so on. We'll probably have some native integrations with those coming out down the road. But in a lot of cases, the way that we've architected the system makes it. It's one command line call to say to do each step in the build process if needed.
And we have another question from one of the attendees. I see that this was a SBIR Phase 1. Did the SBIR originate with one of the Air Force pitch days? And I don't know the answer to that question. So we'll find out and let everybody know as a follow-up. That's a great question. I think part of it was just being in proximity to major players in San Antonio. We've been so exclusively focused on commercial stuff that we are becoming reacquainted. And the humbling thing on my end is, like, of course, all the acronyms and nomenclature is completely different. So there's a learning curve aspect of it, and that's what part of the SBIR process is to relearn the terminology and acronyms. We also had a question, can other agencies participate in our SBIR contract? Yes, they can, is the simple question. And if you have any, obviously, interest or whatever, you can reach out directly to us. Okay, one final question, which is going, I'll throw this one over to Dan. Changing tech stack. Do you have any recommendations on how to evolve new security tools and processes for the changing tech stack, i.e. container stuff?
No. Yeah, so on our roadmap, we're adding support for the popular container scanning technologies. ThreadFix internally is all, for what it's worth, it's a containerized deployment. ThreadFix resembles the types of applications that organizations are moving toward from a microservice containerization standpoint. Shortly on the roadmap, we'll have, we're moving toward native support for the containerization. In the short term, we provide a data format that we call, since we're clever and possibly good at branding, we call it the .threadfix format. That allows you to bring in the results of testing tools that we don't yet have native support for. And so there are ways to bring in the results from tools like that and put them through ThreadFix's consolidation process via that .threadfix format. It's just a JSON-based file format that's documented out on the web. And so if you've got questions about different tools or technologies that you would want to orchestrate or pull into the ThreadFix platform, again, just reach out. We have an internal set of utilities where we've connected with a number of these systems. If you're, if it's worth having a discussion to understand what are the tools that you're looking to connect, what's in your tool set, and we can talk through from a solution architecture standpoint how that works.
Well, we appreciate the questions. It looks like we've answered the major questions that have come in from attendees. We will send out a thank you email afterwards, so you can respond to that if you have any subsequent questions. But appreciate your time in an otherwise busy day, and hope you learned a few things, and look forward to meeting many of you in person.
Thank you, everybody, and be on the lookout for a follow-up email with the recording from today's presentation. Have a great day.